I told people I was a whack job. I told someone recently I was a whack job. They're like, you're a nutcase, not a whack job. And I was like, I don't think I'm nuts. They're like, no, you're certifiably nuts. And I was like, you have nuts. And I was like, oh, I am a nut job. So, casing a building is kind of a crime, but photography itself isn't, and there's no way to distinguish between the two. They can investigate you all they want. They can come up and ask you unreasonable questions like, "Hey, are you casing this joint?" And you could say, "Yeah," and you'd be well within your rights. By the Gregorian calendar, I think, like I had already said, is the 29th, 2022 August. And yeah, we're here from Albany's Rural Cemetery again. We were here yesterday. I saw no reason not to come back today. I told my dad, he's like, where are you off to? I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to the town hall and do a First Amendment audit. He's like, oh, okay. He doesn't know what the fuck that means. He doesn't care. He's not listening to a damn word I'm saying. Shouldn't linger too long under here. It's a good way to die, you know. Probably the same can be said about First Amendment auditing. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. You know, it may not be a lifelong habit, but it sounds like a perfectly good way to go get my rights violated, learn a thing or two about the system which guides, you know, the power hierarchy outside of money. You know, it's kind of the whole point is like, how do they treat the ones that don't have money, right? If a dude in a taxi, and he comes out and he barfs and he's got a missing eye and he's limping, oh, and he comes and he says, I want to complain. Are you going to take him more seriously, or are you going to take the guy that walks in with the fucking Ferrari, parks in the handicap spot, takes his fucking glasses off, looks at you and he's like, I need the complaint form, and he knows the exact name of it. He's like, 98.6, the Edge. I think that was the radio station or whatever. But like, he knows like the exact like case law number or whatever he needs. You know, he's some hotshot lawyer. It's just what he does. You're like, ugh, this guy. But you're not going to get in his way. But as the public servant, are you going to take your butthurt feelings about that guy out on the poor person? Or are you going to treat them both as if they're equitative? As if they're the same species, right? Now, if I go in there as a separate species, are they going to discriminate against me? First of all, I didn't ask to be a different species. Just because they want me to pretend like I'm subject to their laws, that's fine. They can identify me however they want. They can make me subject to their laws as they see fit. That's how it's been, it's how it's going to be. I'm not going to topple the entire government. I can fight it in court if I don't like it. And probably that's what I would do. But I don't think you get to that point. I don't think it has to get to that point. I don't think the intent is to get it to that point. I think the intent is to have it avoided and have a very boring YouTube channel. Right? The idea is not to necessarily go get on people's nerves. But the idea is not to be... It's like, you wouldn't go up to someone and just be like, hey, don't take your fucking pants off, alright? Don't take your fucking pants off. It'd be fun to do random accents to try to make fun of other auditors. One of the things I can't help but doing, and it's considered really rude, is echolalia, where people will say something to me and I'll repeat it back to them as best as I can, exactly the way that they said it to me. So, ooh, that smells so good. This year's yarrow gone to seed. It smells like honey vanilla. So fucking good. That's like the best thing out here, for real. Like, go First Amendment auditing, go smell the yarrow. There's all winter to not smell the yarrow. We'll get there. So, you know, the idea isn't to get on television. Actually, it's the furthest thing from it. The idea is not to seek fame or notoriety. The idea is to change the system if the system is out of compliance with its own policies and ordinance, or is out of compliance with its policy with the Constitution, which is actually a bigger issue. And it isn't the issue that I'm going to try to expose. Like, if it gets exposed, it gets exposed, right? It's like, if you walk into a bank to rob it, that's a different intention than walking into the bank and just seeing, like, wow, there's no security guards here, the money's right out in the open, anyone could at any time just run in and just take this, right? Are you breaking the law by going in and exposing that? Like, hey guys, you may not want to use this bank. They literally leave your money out. Like, as soon as you give them your cash, they don't put it in an account. they just buy gold with it, and then they're just taking that gold for themselves. I have proof of it, right? Like, the intent there to expose corruption, is it that the guy went in there looking for trouble, or is it that trouble existed, right? If you go in there not looking for trouble, and you find that there is in fact trouble, then that's a problem. It's trouble, man. But that's the thing, you know what? It's like, I'm not pretending like I'm not looking for trouble. I'm looking for trouble. I'm not looking to get into trouble. I'm looking for trouble where trouble exists. It's like springing the trap card, you know, but it's like springing it with a stick. It's like, yeah, that wasn't actually a snare trap that was going to get me. Like, I'm not interested in going and harassing public employees with cameras just to get a generated police response. I think it'd be fun. Maybe someday we'll get there. But it isn't that isn't where I think I'm aiming. I think I'm aiming for interview-style sit-downs with intellectuals so that we can intellectually speak about the real way to change the system. I don't want to sit there and fucking talk to your neighbor who calls himself an activist. You know, or worse than that, your douchebag lawyer who's defending the fucking police. Or maybe I do, if he's actually a lawyer. Like, I don't see myself going, not as it exists now. As it exists now, I'm going to create an interview channel. I want to talk to people. So why did you decide at that moment in time that you just weren't going to give him what he needed? Like, I understand he was on your nerves and that you felt personally engaged in the narrative, in a power struggle of both yourself personally, because they had involved you and it had become personal because you just happened to be selected by this monstrosity. But how come you couldn't absolve yourself if you were in a position of public authority? I usually find that the answer to that, because I've asked them, because I live in New York State Capitol, and everyone works for the state and has to deal with the general public, and a lot of people I know have to deal directly to the general public, it's the same thing as, like, listen, bro, you are on, like, alright, so I want to go falsify a bunch of my resume and just go get hired as a bunch of random people that can't find their social security card. But I'm working on getting a new one. I don't want to do identity fraud. I just don't want to exist. They can look me up with as much information as they have. They're not going to get any more out of me. And there's enough floating around out there to do a lot with. I don't know if federal buildings are closed or open to the public. There's also a matter of federal buildings. So the place I was most abused and what got me into this, what radicalized me, I should say, the catalyst, not necessarily what radicalized me, but the precipitating event in my past that if you were to look to as the origin for where these sour feelings came from, the disgruntlement, the need to redress the governance, it comes from a couple, but the most recent of which was kind of the most important. I already have a violent past with police. I've been held at gunpoint, and guess what? I wasn't shot because, one, I complied. Two, I was not the right person. I was not the person they were looking for, but they didn't really want to hear that. They didn't really, I've also been handcuffed. obviously against my will. No one gets well. So it was against my will, right? I was detained at that time. I wasn't arrested, but I was detained, and I was put in the back of a squad car. They had taken the handcuffs off by that point because, you know, I was crying. And then they found out, you know, they listened to everyone's story, and they found out, like, okay, they're going to let me go because I didn't do anything. Which, if they had just listened to me, right? And I understand why it is the way that it is. I do. But as an adult understanding the actual system of governance, understanding, like, reasonable articulate suspicion, and realizing, like, how seriously uninformed these officers were and the way that they were thuggish back then, man, oh man. If they were thuggish back then, how are they probably less thuggish today? Right? Like, if thuggishness peaked in, say, like, the 80s, right, at least there's, like, some degree of accountability now with these cell phones. So part of it is a need to keep myself safe because I've been abused when no one was watching, and when the people who were watching weren't keeping me safe, they were against me. And so it's not a surprise that I generated these feelings that I need to go act out. Like, there's, what's the word? There's like an animosity, you know? Behind it, there's some Jungian shadow that's lurking that I have to resolve in my soul that isn't going to be found by turning the other cheek and absolving them of their sins. Fuck that, dude. I'm not going to declare war. I think that's, it's not a step too far. It just isn't what I'm going to do. I think the best way to hold someone accountable is to their own system. Because at least then that part of the system, one, works, and B, I'm not trying to destroy my own government. Like, that isn't the intention. I'm not trying to, like, make as much of a headache as I can. That isn't really necessarily the point. The point is for me, for my own sanctity of mind, more the wider community that I'm activisting for, to at least raise the bar, or in this case, the floor of what is acceptable behavior, right? And holding them accountable at the absolute bare minimum to their own policies. And if their own policies are out of compliance, and this is kind of what's important to you know, if you're going to actually audit, you should actually really know, right? And I wonder kind of pretty often, actually, like, why don't they hire auditors? Why don't they hire their own auditors? Their own internal auditors who aren't going to throw it on YouTube, right? You generate the response as if it's a real thing, and then it doesn't get uploaded. And I'm not interested in trying to sell it to them. I think that might maybe be even illegal, like extortion or something like that. Like, you do this or I'll do that. But it's different than a lawsuit, right? Like, and there may be a market for that. Like, if you don't want to see this video go live, you'll talk to me, and part of that will mean a settlement. But here's what's interesting about a settlement. In order to settle, I think there has to kind of already be a court case. You'd think that, right? But it isn't the truth. The government isn't liable to just give out money to erroneous, fictitious litigants, or would-be litigants, extortionists, right? Because the people would always be looking for a way to generate a scandal and then have someone else threaten to expose it so that they could play both sides and both get paid. The government wouldn't function. If that's how we paid people, it wouldn't function. All the gold in the whole kingdom would get stolen by corruption within like a week of implementing that field enchantment. That's how I think about it. So, seeing to the ends of a brighter future, heralding the approach of a brighter dawn, I think that there's an impetus to do everything I can to strive for that future, knowing what it could look like, and absolutely knowing that that is so far from ideal that it's like bringing clean water to the slums of India. It's a huge fucking step forward, but it doesn't fix the slums. I am trying to... I am the future. I'm not trying to be something I'm not. The future is here, and people need to know about it. They need to know their rights. They need to know how to defend those rights. They need to know what the technology itself is capable of doing, right? They need to know, first and foremost, that, like, anybody could be broadcasting to any number of people at any given time and be getting feedback in real time. You don't know if someone's a hive mind anymore. You don't know if I'm me or if I'm 30,000 people behind me. I'm always just me, right? But that may not necessarily be the truth for much longer, right? Like if I have an earpiece and I send in a surrogate to do, you know, my surrogate's willing to get locked up. If they want to tackle my surrogate is fully prepared to get bailed out of jail tonight. And you know what? That's fine, because we're paying him so much to basically be a spy, right? To send him in to just spy, right? The type of thing that you do with a camera where you go in quote-unquote First Amendment audit it isn't really tantamount to espionage, right? It's not even a crime. But they aren't going to view it that way, and they're not going to respond to it that way. They may respond to that way in public and let you go about your business, but you'll have an invisible ankle bracelet on you for the rest of your life. You know, like, you'll have good luck passing a background check, right? You know, it may not be the type of background check that they can, like, even really tell you exists. Like a personality profiling dossier. That's unconstitutional to keep that type of information. You'd think, right? You'd think. It certainly wouldn't be a public record if they were keeping that, right? I couldn't go subpoena, I couldn't go FOIA your private, personal dossier, right? I can't, and I use the word subpoena because I meant if you're like the Senate of the United States, for example, you couldn't leverage that against Facebook so that Facebook would have to spill its algorithm, how the algorithm was built, what the algorithm is, and also divulge all the information that they have in raw form to intelligence agencies. Now, obviously that's already happened. I mean, just because the law doesn't allow for that, nor should it, right? Doesn't mean that the technology, it's like if you could, go ahead, you outlawed guns, good, great. All guns are outlawed, great. How's that going for you? How's it really going for you? Right? And so, there's a balance between what they will show you their defensible capabilities are. They don't care about it. I swear on my life. And this is directly racist, but it's not me asserting the racism, if that makes sense. There's an institutional racism built into the defense of public buildings because it looks better when the general public, if they're a minority, has their rights violated. Right? Does that make sense? It's like it removes what they call plausible deniability. Like, it's a lot harder for, like, and I mean this politely, a bum-ass black man, right, to walk up in off the street, slip on the floor, whatever nonsense, pass out, fucking overdose in the bathroom, doesn't matter. And it could be a white guy, but that's not the point. The point is a black guy, right? And then the black guy, or black woman, doesn't really matter, or black person, or black cat, we'll just say citizen of a non-Caucasian persuasion. Right? It's a lot harder for them to cry racism. They can't accuse the government. It's like, really? Because like 80% of the staff, first of all, is hired from the community that they most commonly deal with. And in urban areas, that is usually at least a portion of a poverty community that is treated inherently different just because of the economic circumstances, but also some people, they don't want to talk about it, but because of the race. Now, institutionally, the law governs the way that they can and cannot approach that. They may be a racist in their mind, but there's nothing that they can lawfully do to serve those populations differently, depending on any look, gender, any of it, age, certain things are different types of crimes, like, you know, aggravating circumstances of attacking elderly or minors. It's not that, but that's not what I mean. So, it's like 90% of the time when I watch these videos, right, the security guards, they're like private security guards. They probably are a private company, but they're contracted to the public building and therefore must adhere to the Constitution and to the private. A lot of the time, those men are trained for private property, and they are trained pretty damn well. But they don't realize, they're not, it isn't to say that they're dumb. It's to say that inevitably what ends up happening is they have to call someone smart, right? And they call the smart guy, right? Usually the first guy that shows up is, as secondary, is just as dumb as the first guy, right? Maybe a little smarter, and very often he's white. Not always, but very, very often, right? So it's a private firm that hires almost exclusively dark-skinned people, right, then calls out to the local public dispatch, right? The local public dispatch then sends out white dudes. And where they don't send out white dudes, so be it. But they still behave. I don't know better how to explain this. They behave white. There's a certain different dissection of behavior that you could take apart the little guts of, that you could just tell which ones never do that. And which ones occasionally, sometimes, but maybe not even usually, do that. Right? And you can ascribe those different type of like cultural idiosyncrasies to different ethnicity groups, regardless of which one you're zooming in on in particular. But the police don't do that. They're trained not to do that. They're trained to be above it, because it does. It creates a supremacy, whether that it's unspoken or actualized, and it's notable. It's notable and it's verbally articulatable, but is it reasonable? The Supreme Court says absolutely not. Or does it? Right? Like the police could. They're going to lose their job. And they might get charged with some sort of like something, maybe, but I seriously I actually don't know. I've never tried to analyze it this way. If the cop just straight up calls you the N-word, hard R, just uses it. Or if you're like a white dude, says like you're a Nazi and a rapist, whatever. But the cop says it, right? Now there's probably some sort of like, I don't know, libel, slander, something that someone would want to sue for, like as a civil thing. But I'm not sure it'd be like a lawfully arrestable offense. Maybe some places try to put ordinance that are highly unconstitutional, mind you. That has to do with like profanity or like fighting words, but like, I'm not even sure that would rise to the occasion of, Like, it's just like, is an ethnic slur inherently something that denotes violence? It doesn't justify the violence, but would it be an interlude and interpreted as quote unquote fighting words? I have no idea. I haven't chased the rabbit down the hole far enough yet, but I'm getting there, right? That's where I'm at with my law studies. I don't know. I gotta go read a bunch of case law because I don't know. But what I do know is that there's a different level of accountability to the public servants that are outsourced to just like private firms that are just kind of trying to pay employees that mostly, you can't tell anyone I told you this, but a lot of it has to do with they can't justify Section 8, like housing money going that much of it to certain parts of different communities. So they'll give jobs. It's called job generation. It's kind of called affirmative action in a way. And it does. It generates jobs. And I think it's a good thing, because for every responsible adult man that you put back into that community after taking them out, it's kind of like washing them, And, it's like you get the dirty off them. You give them a uniform. You give them an air of professionalism. And they uphold that professionalism, kind of, right? But then they call the white men in usually. And then if and above that they have to call like the sergeant, lieutenant, the chief, whoever. Always that's a white guy. And like in the rare circumstances where that isn't the case, good on them. But they still, like I said, they still behave. And I don't want to, and it really actually isn't appropriate because it's demeaning to say like behaving white. But you know what I'm talking about. Behaving in a way that, you know what I'm talking about. And certainly more importantly than you know what I'm talking about is when it's not happening. That's actually more important. And, but yeah, so I'm going to go in there with a very specific silent attitude at first. Just kind of an air of psychosis, because that's kind of what it is, right? And I want to know, are these fucking men going to be held accountable so that they don't whisper shit in my ear like, that's a good girl, while they're giving me like a secondary fucking pat down in the camera's blind. I don't know if it's the camera's blind spot, because I didn't know that you could, FOIA request security footage like that. I don't even think you could. From a federal building, I think they'd laugh you out of the building. I think they'd be like, nope, because it's like, it would give away the position, and something security, we couldn't do it, something privacy, go fight us in court. And it'll be so tightly written to the letter of some law you didn't know existed, and that they're not going to tell you exists. I mean, that's like a real problem. secret courts and stuff like that. Right, so at some level, they're going to be doing that stuff against me. And they'll kind of just clear me. They won't put out any alert like, known CIA terrorist. But they got to make sure, right? They got to find out who my parents were, who my grandparents were. They probably all already have that in my dossier from the last couple times that I was accused of making bomb threats. I was accused of, well, that was the big one. Mind you, I was accused. I was never convicted, and I can't imagine that went any further than that investigative questioning, pseudo-interrogation. Like, it's like a voluntary interrogation. Like, you're either going to get interrogated or you're getting kicked off campus. It's like, oh, I guess I'll answer some of your questions then. Gave a bunch of schizo answers. That's the right move. Actually, the right move would have been to remain silent, but I didn't know my rights back then. So that's another catalyzing moment. Was a false accusation. And it was weird because they really wanted to see my phone. They really needed to see my phone, because I was like, no, I'm not going to show you my fucking phone. Like, well, this could clear this whole thing up. I'm like, right. But what you're telling me doesn't exist. And so if I prove to you that it doesn't exist, then I've just spilled my guts to you for no reason. You got to prove that it does exist. And I knew that even a little bit back then. I didn't know I didn't know about the first, second, fourth, first, fifth, any of the amendments. I didn't die. Why didn't they teach me that? They definitely did teach me them, but they didn't teach me the implication of them. It was just like in 5th grade, they're like, oh yeah, here they are. Here's like one quiz on them. Hey, you got an A. All right, I'm moving on to the next chapter. Now you know your rights. But they don't talk to you about they don't talk to you about the Miranda case, right? Like, that was before my birthday. Why didn't they talk to me about that? That was in the fucking the 80s or something, maybe even the 60s. I don't remember. But the fact that I don't remember is a problem. Like, why didn't they teach that in 10th grade, right? I was talking about this yesterday. Why don't the police, why don't community theater actors work with schools and children to make the police look as bad and as dirty and as guilty as they always end up being? How many times have you had a good interaction with the police? There is something to be said about having a law enforcement. Don't get me wrong. I think having detectives is super necessary. I think having a bunch of buff dudes to some extent is pretty necessary. There's a bunch of other buff dudes. Honestly, and maybe not to make moral apology, because I don't like how violent it is, it makes some sense to, at some scale, militarize, scaled to against holding at least a fighting chance in a fight against the cartel. Now, does that mean that my local jurisdiction can justify that? Well, they better be pointing to a time where they lost a fight. But do we want to tell the police that, well, you have to lose the fight in order to get what you need to have protected yourself? I mean, that's, it's so there's a bickering back and forth between, who deserves what. Should we give it to Section 8? Should we roundabout hire a private firm that hires people who are, non-felons, whatever? Then you got the dudes outside working in the gardens and picking up trash. Are they going to be treated the same as the hotshot lawyer who rolls up in his Ferrari, whips off his fucking sunglasses? Oh, you again? Yeah, I know the deal. Yeah, baby, you do know the deal. Looking for whatever. Is she around in the back room? Yeah, sir. Here's your paper. Okay, see you later, sweetheart. Because there's a bunch of those guys that exist. I've seen them. I've seen the way they behave. I'm like, oh, daddy. We'll be back after this. So, I don't know what this is. So this reminds me of Morning Glory, and it does look to be a vine, but the flower is not Morning Glory. I don't know what this is, but it's not Morning Glory. It reminds me of something else. Maybe this may, I don't know. I don't know. American hog peanut, but it's an albino? It doesn't sound right. Well, let's look this up. Okay, so I had it right. It's American hog peanut, but apparently American hog peanut isn't just purple. I thought it was just purple, but apparently there's a white variety of it, so I had it right. So, the premise of the show, right? Like the show is, it's like we're working on a show. Like a show is a show. It's because there's information that needs to be disseminated to the public, and if that information can't be disseminated to the public, then you're basically directly and adversely affecting neurodiverse people in such a way that is crippling. It's so ableistly supreme that it's almost laughable. It's like, I'm sorry, you claim to be in compliance with like ADA, the Autistic Dog Association, the American Disabilities Act. You claim to be, but like, I can't get my wheelchair upstairs, and I had to walk it from the other side of the road from your overflow parking. That doesn't make any sense, right? There's standards that we have to uphold to. Now, I don't think that every single place right now is required to have an autistic DSTIM area. I think that should be changed. I think every single place should have. We don't have to call it a temple because we have to keep it secular. You know, it isn't intended to be used religiously. It's used. It could be. You could go in there and do prayer, but you have to be silent. That's the whole point, right? If part of your de-stimming process is verbal, then you can go to a shared verbal area or outside. And if you're not allowed to go outside, is the Navy out of compliance if this place exists? Like, where is it limited to, right? Like, we can't just tell everyone, well, you have to create a de-stim room. What if it's impossible? You can't engineer on a nuclear submarine. It's like, well, no. But it should have to be within compliance within 3 months. I think that's long enough to clear someone's office out and figure out accommodations. Or, you know what, if you need the room, fire someone. It doesn't have to be a big room. It doesn't have to be comfortable. But here's the thing. What happens when multiple employees want to do it, right? So you chase this rabbit hole, right? You got to think about it. You got to really consider it before you try to move forward with legislation. Like, what are the talking points that I need to know? What are my public servants doing? Not so much to be held accountable to the First Amendment. That's what allows me to do this. And I am testing that too, but if I really need somewhere, like, they don't have a general, because it'll become a homeless shelter, you know what I mean? Like, okay, listen, buddy, it's been 15 minutes. The sign says 15 minutes. We're allowed to limit you to 15 minutes. Right? But are they allowed to limit you to 15 minutes? Is it illegal to stay somewhere for more than 15 minutes? Because I'm pretty sure loitering is not a crime. You can try to make it a crime, but I'm pretty sure it's not a crime. I don't know if I would want to test that if some cop was telling me I'm just loitering. I'd be like, loitering, huh? Loitering. That's what you're gonna go with. They're really big. You know, I told people I was a whack job. I told someone recently I was a whack job. They're like, you're a nutcase, not a whack job. And I was like, I don't think I'm nuts. They're like, no, you're certifiably nuts. And I was like, you have nuts. And I was like, oh, I am a nut job. Now what? So, this one right here is called wood aster. And then off the path here, we'll step very carefully as to not crush anything. So someone crushed all the moss. Probably was me. Could have been. But I actually don't think it was. I usually don't do that. But yeah, this is called Doll's Eye, also known as white baneberry. And this is the update for it on the 29th of August, 2022. I'm not even going to touch it. Like, I probably could, but I'm not gonna. Oh, an actual honeybee. Let's go, little dude. A real pollinator. I forget exactly what this plant is. I don't want to misspeak. Oh, I think it might be snake root. I'm gonna look it up. So it's called Collinsonia canadensis, and is known as richweed, and it is not snakeweed. I had it wrong, and I'm glad I looked it up because it is. It's called richweed. So I actually have to get a picture of this for my Pokédex, so I can say that I captured it on the 29th day of August, 2022. Very, very beautiful plant. And then, here next to it, oh shit, this is white baneberry. Oh, I'm falling. Ah! Oh my goodness. White baneberry, also known as doll's eye. Isn't that wild? You would not want to eat this. You'd die. Well, you might die, but you definitely don't want to see if you will die, because you probably will die. You can't eat it. Don't eat it. It's toxic. So again, it's Collinsonia canadensis, also known as richweed. Wait, let me triple check that. I have First Amendment audits, but everyone is just speaking in Chinese, so it sounds something like I can't fucking do Chinese. Sounds like some like Thai, whatever mixed up language. No one can speak it. You can't even identify what language it is, right? But the auditors are speaking it, right? How are the police going to respond? Are they going to be talked down, or are they going to make an unreasonable arrest? If a Chinese tourist comes in and only knows how to speak Chinese to the town hall, and all they want to do is just like ching chong on the way through, just fucking taking pictures of everything, wearing the goofy hat, wearing the little life preserver. If they want to do that, that's their constitutional right to do that. And the Constitution should be upheld above people's paranoia that could be something interlude to like the Red Dawn. It's just not gonna happen, bro. The waterfall was nice today. Let's go chill there for a while. I'm in no rush. Am I in a rush? I'm not in a rush. 6 o'clock. Yeah, this time of year this is the end of it, This is the end of the year. There's only a couple days left in this year. It's been a hell of a year, guys. Really. I can pick this up today. No reason I can't. It's a little wet, but whatever. There was some glass earlier I didn't pick up because I don't want to pick glass up. I move glass all into one big pile. Is usually what I do. But I don't usually pick it up. It's not whoever touched it last's responsibility, you know what I mean? Like, you touched it last. Could have just left it there forever and ignored it forever. I don't care about your dog's paw. Oh, I have a 5-year-old kid. Oh, I had to bring him to get stitches. No, you didn't. Right? But it's like, well, you didn't because people like me are out here protecting it. I think there's a tour group here. I could just be being paranoid. But I think that's true, and I base that on the amount of cars and the way that the cars were parked. And so I'm keeping my ears up, keeping my eyes out. Mostly I'm just in my own zone. I think I do hear some voices up there. But I could just be completely nuts. Bum 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 bum. I gotta go all the ways up that. Oh boy. Alright, we'll be back after this. I'll be out of breath. Found a monarch. Oh, there it goes. Sorry, I'm going this way anyways. Bye. Where's my bike? Oh, there it is. Always over there. Alright, thanks for joining, guys. This was 29th of August, 2022. And we'll be back probably tomorrow. Thanks for joining.